Right about that time, there was a brain study that was done, and what they discovered was that between the ages of about 10 months or a little bit before and 5 years, the neural connections in the mind, the brain, are developing in such a manner that if you don't have a woman, specifically, because I'm going to mention why here in a minute, if you don't have a woman talking to that child on a regular basis, it causes literal brain damage. And the reason being, and why is it that women's, well, anybody who's ever learned a foreign language knows that women speak much more clearly and much more distinctly than men do. So there's that element. The second thing is that God gave women that if you actually look at the structure of their brain, the language center in their brain is 3 times the size as a man's. Women get 10 times the amount of pleasure out of talking than men do. Literally, that's what they say. Yeah, we all know it's true. But here's the thing. That the reason God gave her that pleasure is so that she would talk regularly with the children. And that is a necessary thing, because otherwise the children don't develop. There's a whole other series of why women's empathy actually helps children avoid disaffective disorders when they're younger. So the role that women play is so key. There used to be a phrase that the privilege of woman was to form the mind of man. Think about that. If you really think about it, historically, what the role of women was actually to educate and structure the devotional life. Even though the devotional life is under the direction of the father, it was the women who taught it. It was the women who engendered it. It was the women who actually passed on the tradition of the church by teaching the children, these are the doctrines, etc., of the church. It was the women who did this. And what did we do? We took them out and put them in a cubicle where they can't stand it. So what we have to do then, if you look at all of this, we have to do this. This is what I was getting to. We have to get to the point back in our culture where we put the nobility and the magnificence of motherhood back on the pedestal. We have to do it. It's the only way that our culture is going to survive. Historically, they could say you could tell the health of a culture by looking at the women in the culture. And I think it's true. Actually, I think you could even narrow it down to the mothers of the culture. The last one by office is ownership. So if we have ownership, we can actually command demons to leave our property. So by the natural law, then, we can command demons in relationship to our natural rights by office. And the last one is by obligation or duty. Now, this obligation or duty is, so for example, in relationship to the fourth commandment, we have obligations to the fourth commandment. So the children have an obligation to honor their parents even after they graduate. And this honor is what? And this is what most people don't see. It's not just saying being nice to your parents. And it's not just taking care of their parents, although that's true. It's a matter of living an honorable life because it reflects upon your parents. And that honorable life is excellence, and that excellence is in virtue, okay? But because we have obligations of the fourth commandment, this means that the parents, because part of the fourth commandment is the parents' obligation to, if something were to happen to one of their adult children, to actually take care of them if nobody else could, or if they weren't married or what have you. They have an obligation to take care of them. So there's still obligations there. And because of that duty, you have the right to command the demons to leave them alone. So parents, even of adult children, have the right to command them, the demons, to leave. When you're talking about the children to the parents, because children have obligations of the fourth commandment to take care of their parents when they get older and to see to their financial or physical or spiritual well-being when they get older, that means that the children have the right to command the demons to leave their parents. This is really important if your parents aren't leading good Catholic lives, or if they're about to die and they're not willing to see a priest. Start saying binding prayers. And you'll notice the person's head will clear, and then they'll be opened up to seeing a priest. The siblings can do it for each other too, because if my sister were to, fall gravely ill, and her husband had died and she felt gravely ill, I have an obligation to take care of her. And as a result, because of the fourth commandment, in fact, the obligations of the fourth commandment in the history of the church are so strong that the church said that the obligations of the fourth commandment supersede even vows of stability. That meant if you took a vow and of stability, which means that you would stay in the same monastery and never come out. If your parents were dying, you had to come out to fulfill the obligations of the fourth commandment if you're the only one that could do it. And that gives the siblings the ability, though, however, to command the demons to leave in relationship to each other. There are certain people that don't have a right to command, and that's grandparents. Grandparents do not have the right to command their grandchildren. They do their own children. They do have the right to command the demons to leave in relationship to their own children, but not to the grandchildren. Non-adopted children, you don't have the right to command. You do have a right, the father at least has rights over the household, and so he can set the tone. So like if an adult child comes into his house, he doesn't have the right to command the child directly, but he has the right to say, if you're going to live in the house, here's the rules. And if you're not going to follow them, there's the door. Right? Okay. And the child has an obligation to follow that because of that, as a matter of respect to the father's right to have headship over or to have authority over the household. But then there's also godparents. What about godparents? Because sometimes people get that. And in some cultures, godparents are pretty significant, which is good. But godparents, St. Thomas Aquinas said, have right of counsel, not of command. They have the right to tell you, hey, you're not living your Catholic faith. You got to start living your Catholic faith with it if it's their godchild. But they don't have the right to command him, hey, come mow my lawn. Well, that would be nice if you could. All right. So all of this authority structure plays a very important role because of the fact that in spiritual warfare, there are two principles that we want to parse out. The first is that precision is everything in spiritual warfare. I'll give you an example. I've had case after case after case of possession where we'll say prayers and prayers and prayers. We're praying for literally years in some cases over in order to get this demon out. And then all he says is, you just have to say this one prayer at this altar and she's liberated. You go there, boom, he's out. We've been praying for years. It's the precision. St. Thomas even says in the Summa that the more precise your prayers are, the more efficacious they actually are. And this is true, especially in spiritual warfare. But it also means that in spiritual warfare, it's all about power for the demons. You see, demons lost their state of grace. They lost their natural happiness. They lost their ability to have any kind of real relationships with each other because they hate each other and they can't stand each other and they're always trying to hurt each other. So that in hell, there's only one thing left, and that's power. One. That's it. Just one thing. And so it's all about the power structure. Now, power is the ability to affect change. So what's that got to do with the authority structure? Well, in relationship to the authority, if the authority figure is acting according to the natural law or the divine positive law from an authority that was given to him, when he commands the demon to do it, it has a force or a power about it. That means that they know that it's all about the authority structure. It's all about, and that's why they're constantly attacking it. So what does this mean? It means that the Father, because he has the obligation to maintain what they call the code in the cult. The code is the moral code, and the cult is how we worship God. It's his obligation to maintain that, and that's his, and within his line of a chain of command, that is within his authority structure. That means if he maintains it under God, then the family becomes quasi-impervious to the attacks because he's acting within his rights, and the demons have to respect that. And they respect it, as I mentioned, because they know that God is to be obeyed, and they never disobey him anymore, never. So they know that. That's why they're chiseling away at it. But if the father commits mortal sin within the context of the family, he doesn't just commit sin for himself. He takes the entire chain of command that's under him underneath that same process of going from underneath God to the diabolic. That's what happens. He opens the door to the demons afflicting the family. The same is true in relationship to the wife and the mother and the children. So when if she was to commit some grave evil, then if she starts usurping her husband's authority, she's opening the door to the diabolic getting into the family line. And so once they get in, so if the husband commits a sin, a grave sin, the demons get into his life, and then now because he's the authority structure, they're in the home, they've gotten inside the fortress, so to speak, and now they can start picking at the children. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen this very thing play out.